Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Sports Insight with your host, Alamdar Khan. And yes, as you know, we give you sports information from all across the globe. You guys can surely reach out to us on our social media handle, which is at the rate of Indus New Sports. That basically works both for Twitter and for Instagram. But anyways, we'll go to the headlines first. And yes, from the world of NBA playoffs, Bucks managed to defeat Miami Heat 132-98, while the Nuggets beat the Blazers 128-109. And yes, from the world of football, Manchester United midfielder Bruno Fernandes has piped Manchester City defender Ruben Dias to the Premier League Player of the Year season crown in the annual Sports Mold Reader Awards. And yes, from the world of French Open, Francesa Jones is out of the first round of the French Open qualifying. Yes, the sad news from the world of Formula One. The privacy campaigner and ex-motorsport boss Max Mosley died at the age of 81. And yes, those were the headlines. And yes, obviously, as we know, the playoff round one is still underway in terms of the world of NBA. Not to forget, an interesting match that we're going to start off with. But we have with us Ricardo Barreto, who's basically an NBA journalist. Ricardo, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me again.
Great. Ricardo, obviously the playoffs are now here. We'll start off the first match that took place, which is the game one, and obviously the Utah Jazz versus the Memphis Grizzlies. And what a close call, what a close match to begin with. And how do you see the development? Because in terms of Jazz, they've always been like on the top of their conference. But how do you see this first round one game and the first game that happened between Memphis Grizzlies and Utah Jazz?
Well, that was obviously a bit of a surprise because the Utah Jazz had the best record in the regular season,
Right.
52 wins, 20 losses. The Memphis Grizzlies had to play the play-in tournament to get to the playoffs. They were not favorites to win this series. They are not. They are still not favorites to win the series, but they had an amazing game one. Obviously, Donovan Mitchell didn't play for the Utah Jazz. He's still not. He wasn't 100% with that ankle injury. He's going to play game two, but that was a big factor. And also the outstanding defense from the Memphis Grizzlies. They still have that grit and grind. Ja Morant is playing great at this moment in his career. Jonas Valanciunas is doing a great job on the boards, and I have to mention Dillon Brooks. He's a pest on defense, and he did one of his best games of his career with 31 points. So he was huge for them.
Right. And if we look into the first quarter, everything seemed on one direction. Obviously, it was definitely 24-17 in the first quarter. And instantaneously, when we come up to the second and the third quarter, the second quarter was, I guess, the major turn of events for the Grizzlies, because in the second quarter, they managed to score 32 and obviously keeping their defense so high that the Jazz could not even cross 19 points.
Yes, the defense is the Grizzlies' DNA, and so they didn't start the game well in that end of the court. But then things just went their way. Their shots started going in. And then when the shots start going in, the defense always is better because shots go in, they are more balanced to do the defensive transition. And so they were able to play their game a little better. And defensively, they were huge in the second and third quarters.
Right. And when we talk about the final quarter, obviously, if you look into the Grizzlies, they were not able to score as much as the Utah Jazz. Obviously, they scored 35, while Grizzlies scored 29. But I think the damage was done. And the impact of the game, we all know now, because obviously, Jazz being the strongest team, it's definitely out of surprise for every NBA fan out there.
Yeah, it was a surprise. And one big surprise for me were the points in the paint, because Utah Jazz have on their roster Rudy Gobert, which he is the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year. He always protects the rim so well, and the Memphis Grizzlies scored 62 points in the paint. That was a big issue for the Utah Jazz defense. So I think that for Game 2, Coach Quinn Snyder from the Utah Jazz will have a different game plan. Of course, Donovan Mitchell will be back and help them on both ends of the floor, but
Right.
they have to close that paint because they can't allow the Grizzlies to score so many points in the paint.
Right. We'll jump over to the game 2, which surely is the Bucks winning against the Heat, and obviously it was pretty much one-sided if we talk about this, because in terms of looking at the numbers and the stats, 132 to 98. What's your take on this specific match?
Well, this was a bit of a disappointment because after Game 1, decided on overtime with clutch shots from Jimmy Butler in the end of the fourth quarter, and then a clutch shot from Chris Middleton in the end of the overtime. We were expecting a big game, a close game, and it was everything but close. The Milwaukee Bucks came out of the tunnel just shooting threes, shooting lights out. They scored 10 threes in the first quarter, 15 threes in the first half, and
Right.
then it was a big gap already in the score. So the Miami Heat were always behind, trailing for over 20 points, and the game was decided in the first half.
Right. And if we look into Bucks' performance, if we look at the chart on, before the play-ins and the playoffs, if you remember, there are 2 victories over the Brooklyn Nets. If you haven't forgotten, I think that was probably one of the major, motivation factor, because the Bucks are now, I think, gelled up to a point of, getting up to 132 and not letting Miami Heat score not even more than 100. So how do you think of that victory? Because I think Bucks are surely going to go a long way now.
Yeah, well, the Bucks were a bit nervous in the first game. The Miami Heat went to the finals last year, so they really wanted to have another playoff run this year.
Right.
But the Bucks are doing things differently now. They are using their rotations differently. Coach Mike Budenholzer is doing a little bit different things in defensive end of the floor. Is doing more switches on screens. That helps them a lot because they have bodies that are so versatile that they can switch on all screens, and that helps them defensively. And they had a major improvement in their lineup with the addition of Jrue Holiday. It's totally different having Jrue Holiday than Eric Bledsoe. Jrue Holiday is a perennial, is an all-star. He's an all-star, so he's elite in both ends of the floor. And Chris Middleton scored the last bucket in the overtime, but then the final play of the game was a block from Jrue Holiday on Jimmy Butler. So that gives them an edge, an extra advantage on both ends of the floor. And yesterday, the game on Game 2, we saw Jrue Holiday finish the game with 15 assists. Giannis Antetokounmpo is not a playmaker. Chris Middleton is not a playmaker. Now they have a true playmaker. They didn't have an Eric Bledsoe, and that's Jrue Holiday that with 15 assists is their floor general, and that's a huge boost comparing to last year.
Absolutely. And in terms of Giannis, if we look back into the MVP and the run for MVP, I think now they all are literally all-star in terms of their gelling in. It's not a one-man show anymore. I think it's a complete teamwork which has led them, because if we look into Nets, it was more of a one-man duo, trio. Obviously, the trio didn't really work, but duos to begin with. But I think Bucks will definitely go along. I'll quickly jump over to the third game, which is the Nuggets, obviously winning against the Trailblazers, 128 to 109. What's your take on this match?
Well, this was a good game. We had to stay up here in Portugal until 5 a.m. to watch the end of the game. It was a good game. 2 superstars battling with Damian Lillard on one side and Nikola Jokic on the other side. Lillard was on fire on the first half. He scored 30 points in the first half. He scored 22 points in the second quarter. He had a record for most threes in a half, 8 threes in a half in a playoff game. That was a record that belonged to Vince Carter and that Damian Lillard also had last night. So he was trying to to lead the Trailblazers to another victory in Denver. That would be huge for the Trailblazers that don't have home court advantage to win 2 games away from home. They now, winning the first game, have home court advantage, but now the Nuggets, they had to win this game. They had to win this game, and they in the second half they didn't let the Trailblazers get close on the score. We had great performances, not only from Jokic, but I think we had a great performance from Aaron Gordon. It doesn't show on the statistics. It doesn't show, the numbers don't show it. But Aaron Gordon asked the coach Mike Malone to defend Damian Lillard in the second half, and he did a great job. Damian Lillard didn't score too much points in the second half. He scored only 10 points. Right. His first field goal in the second half was really close to the end of the third quarter. So we have to underline what Aaron Gordon did on the defensive side of the floor.
Right. Well, Ricardo, thank you so much for being a part of the show. The upcoming matches are super interesting when we talk about the Nets, Celtics, Sun versus Lakers, and Clippers versus Maverick. But we'll surely have you once again to discuss more of the upcoming matches. Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great. So as we know how things are developing in the world of NBA, yes, there have been some major upsets, starting from obviously the Jazz losing against the Grizzlies as discussed, and then Bucks winning against Heat, and then the Nuggets winning against the Trailblazers. But yes, the upcoming matches are going to be super interesting, and we'll surely cover them for you. Anyways, what we'll do is we'll take a quick break, and once we come back from the break, we'll discuss more of the sports. See you guys after the break. And yes, welcome back from the break. And yes, before the break, we were discussing the world of NBA and the playouts and then play-ins actually, and it was pretty interesting about it. But as we all know, that we talk about all sorts of sports all across the globe. So more interestingly, now we'll focus more on the Premier League, and not only that, we'll talk about how things have been evolving there. We talk about Manchester United's midfielder Bruno Fernandes, who's piped Manchester City's defender Ruben Diaz to make the Premier League Player of the Season crown. But not only that, we'll surely be talking about that, but interestingly, we'll talk about the insights on the major matches that took place in terms of finalizing the Premier League table. So we have with us Martin Zielger, who's all the way discussing the insight and the in-depth of the Premier League matches. So anyways, Martin, welcome to the show.
Hi, how are we doing?
I am well, and thank you for being a part of the show. I'll start off with the interesting lineups of the last few matches that actually changed or basically turned the table. We'll start off with the first match that I'd want to talk about would be Arsenal versus Brighton. So what's your take on not only that, but to start off with the change of tables in the last few matches in the Premier League?
Yeah, so I mean, Arsenal had a very good end to the season, and I think a lot of this was due to some players like Pepe coming into form. He scored 2 excellent goals against Brighton, which highlighted actually, I think he has now become a real Premier League force. He struggled to settle in initially. Now he looks really dangerous. I think there are some promising signs for next season for Arsenal supporters. Also important, I think, is whether they can keep Martin Odegaard. He's on loan from Real Madrid. I think Arsenal need to buy him to show that they can compete for the Champions League next season. He's been a very, very important influence there. They have had a disappointing time. They didn't get to the Europa League final. They're ending the season in 8th place. But the way they finished the season, and especially against Brighton, I think there are some positive signs there.
Right. Not only positives for Arsenal, I would quickly jump over to, let's talk about the interesting take of Liverpool. I think the turn of events for Liverpool came up to that point of bringing them on in the top 3, because I think if we look back into Liverpool's performance maybe a few weeks ago, I still remember they were being on the 7th or the 8th of the table, but their last match against Crystal Palace, 2-0, and not only that victory, obviously Chelsea losing against Aston Villa. I think all these turn of events brought Liverpool on number 3.
Correct. I mean, the other important fixture there was Leicester City losing. So Leicester dropped out of the top 4, and they've been there for months, and suddenly the very last weekend of the season, they fall off, which is partly due to Liverpool managing to put a run together. I mean, it would have been incredible for the Premier League champions to do so badly the following season they don't get into the Champions League. But for many weeks, it was looking that was going to be the case. But this went into the last game of the season. They had fans back for the first time at Anfield. And Sadio Mane, who's not had a great season at all, he came up trumps. He scored both goals. Very important. It means, financial terms, it means a massive amount to Liverpool.
Absolutely, and I think they did deserve to get here in terms of where Liverpool is right now. They were surely going through a very, very rough time, specifically in the end few weeks of the Premier League. But not to forget, those who were having the good times were Chelsea. After Thomas Tuchel, obviously things really, really were changing for them on a brighter side. But since they've lost the FA Cup, if you look back into the FA Cup and their loss to that, the final, we've seen a deterioration in Chelsea's performance, and not to forget that we are still looking forward for an interesting matchup or a lineup in the Champions League final. Do you think Chelsea is ready for that now?
Well, you're right. Things started so well with Thomas Tuchel. They went on this incredible run. They looked really organised in defence, and then suddenly things started to stutter a bit. They lost to Leicester City in the FA Cup final. They were beaten by Aston Villa. They were very lucky that Leicester lost. Otherwise, Chelsea would have been out of the Champions League.
Right.
That is a stroke of luck. And now they're going to face Manchester City in the Champions League final. And Manchester City, they look unstoppable. Right. Chelsea are struggling at the moment. It'd be a worrying time for Tuchel.
Right. Absolutely. And if we look into Manchester City, as you're mentioning, for sure, they're spot on. They know where the goal is. They know how to get it. They're absolutely ready for the Champions League final. But right now, Chelsea seems really, really tired. And I think this is not the time for the team to get tired. I'm sure they would want to struggle, but I think they will have to formulate the same formula, or Thomas Tuchel would need to engage them in such a way as he did a few weeks ago when he joined them as a coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe part of the problem is that the players were almost looking ahead to the Champions League final. They don't want to get injured. They don't want to get any sort of disciplinary issues. Right. So I think maybe when they play against Aston Villa, they're not focusing enough on the job in hand. Right. Their minds are half thinking about the final in Porto against Manchester City, because obviously that's an enormous game for them. But you've got, as a professional, you've got to focus on the here and now. You've got to do the job in hand, and True. They were very fortunate.
True. And job in hand, in terms of their loss against Aston Villa, we had a conversation with one of the journalists who were actually there watching that match. And as per him, he said that they were putting in their best, because when it comes to Chelsea's defensive side, they are definitely spot on. But he said, yes, we see something is missing, and if this missing continues, then it would be very, very hard for them to face Manchester City, who is absolutely on fire for now.
Sure. I mean, we saw Manchester City against Everton. Everton have been a strong side this season.
Right.
Manchester City hit 5 goals. Could have been more. Right. Mahrez hit the crossbar. And Sergio Aguero, his final ever match, he came on. He scored 2 excellent goals. He then breaks the record for the most goals ever by a single player for a single club in the Premier League. Rooney held that record before, Wayne Rooney. Right. Now Sergio Aguero holds that. Nobody has scored more goals in the Premier League for one club than him. What a way to go out. What a way to end his incredible career he's had in the Premier League with Manchester City.
Right. So do you currently think that, in terms of their performance, because, now is the moment of truth for them, because this is what all the teams would want to work for and they strive for to get there. Now is the time for them to prove their worth, as if they really want to prove themselves, because now they're facing Manchester City, and Manchester City, as we've discussed, is so spot on. They know each and every move even before they start making that move, and they can definitely make sure. For instance, in terms of Chelsea, do you think Chelsea needs to be more on the offensive side or the defensive side?
I think Chelsea needs to try and rediscover the system and the approach that they took when Thomas Tuchel first took over. So being very organised, having a proper game plan, using Mason Mount and Pulisic, that movement off the ball. They play quite. If they can get space in midfield, then they can actually hurt the opposition quite well. I think what they need to be wary about is that Manchester City are going to press them so hard that they won't be able to get the ball up to those players, because actually Chelsea's distribution out of defence is often not the best. I think that's a problem they're going to have to address, because Manchester City will want to get their defenders to hit the ball long. That's not good for Chelsea, and if they can avoid doing that, I think that's their best hope.
Well, let's hope for the best. And obviously, as discussed, we talk about Arsenal. They eventually ended up doing well. We talk about Liverpool. They managed to get there on the top three. Even though Liverpool, what they were lacking, if we look back, they were having a lot of issues in their defense and, trying to I think there was a major issue because of their maybe the center back and those who could assist and maybe make that finishers. So how do you see them right now being on the top three? Because that was literally one of the most unexpected situation or unexpected end of the season for the entire Premier League.
Yeah, they really struggled without Virgil van Dijk. I mean, any club would, because he's such a strong and brilliant player. Just, probably the best defender in the world. I mean, Ruben Diaz he's been the Footballer of the Year by the football writers in England, and I voted for him. He's been excellent, but Virgil van Dijk is up there, and if you don't have him in your team, then no wonder Liverpool struggled. And they also missed Joe Gomez. Is also important. He plays really well alongside Virgil van Dijk. So if they can get him back for next season, then they can sort of rebuild, because it's it's going to be, everyone's going to have to go up to another level if they're going to challenge Manchester City. That's for sure.
And if we look back into some major magical tricks by Liverpool, what's your take on their goalkeeper scoring that amazing goal in the last few minutes of the match?
Yeah, I mean, again, that was one of those moments which just, if that hadn't happened, they would have been down and out. They wouldn't be in the Champions League. It's just one of these incredible times when they look back at their when they won the Premier League title, some amazing moments there. That was just as important, and what a great header.
Right.
I don't think anybody was expecting that when he went up for the corner, because it wasn't just a scuff or a lucky header. It was directed. It was powerful. It was great.
I guess it was something that was truly needed for Liverpool to be where they are. Martin, thank you so very much for being a part of the show and discussing the insight and in-depth analysis on the Premier League.
No problem. Good to speak to you.
Great. And yes, that was an interesting, in-depth analysis in terms of the Premier League and what major turn of events on where it is right now. Not to forget that, now we're looking forward for two major things. That's the Europa Cup final, which is on the 27th. And not only that, we're looking forward for the Champions League final. So I think two major events coming up, and we'll surely update you all with regards to that. But we'll quickly jump over to the next news of the day. Yes, we talk about the world of tennis. And Francesca Jones is out of the first round of the French Open qualifying, and she lost against Vera Zonavera, who is basically a Russian player, and she lost 6-1 and 6-2. And Jones actually had reached the Australian Open round back in the first round in February, and she made her Grand Slam main draw debut in 2021 Australian Open. But now that she's out of the league, I think there's more in terms of tennis coming up, and we'll surely keep you guys posted on what's really happening in the world of tennis. And now I'll quickly jump over to the next news, which is from the world of Formula One. Yes, let's talk about the ex-motorsport boss, Max Mosley, who basically died at the age of 81. And yes, Mr. Mosley had been suffering from cancer. He led the motorsport governing body of the FIA from 1993 to 2009. Mr. Mosley initiated the widespread reforms on the safety procedures of the F1. And Max Mosley is one of the most influential and important figures in F1, and we surely have our condolences to his family, and obviously it's a big loss in the world of Formula One. Anyways, guys, this was pretty much it from the world of sports. If you guys want to reach out to us, please do on our social media handle, which is @Indus News Sports. That works both for Twitter and for Instagram. Anyways, take good care of yourself, and bye-bye.